Indication that we're golden from. All right. So, Director, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. This is our monthly meeting of the Stable Token Commission. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that we have a quorum. So I'll do the roll call for that. Commissioner Stevens. Here. We have Commissioner Navas online.
Yes, I'm here, Anthony.
We have Commissioner Revelle online.
Do not see
Commissioner. It's on the line.
Okay,
Chairman Gordon.
here. And I would note it's a little hard to hear.
Check. Mic check.
There we go.
There we go.
Yep, good.
So, Mr. Chairman, do you have a quorum?
Very good. Well, Director, please want to welcome Stephanie here. And so I hope in your introductory remarks you can welcome her as well.
Certainly will. Before I get to my introductory remarks, as always, I want to get my disclaimers out of the way.
Okay.
So I'll list all of those. So agendas and sign-in sheets are in the front of the room this time. So if you didn't want to, please fill those out. It's always helpful for us. And then our disclaimer. Key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. At this time, no blockchain has been selected for deployment of Wyoming stable tokens, and no Wyoming stable tokens have been issued. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, government, or a majority vote of the commission. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. This time, these are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels at WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. And with that said, I would be very happy to introduce Stephanie Chan, who is our new Senior Business Project Manager. She joined the team on Friday of last week. So between this discussion and the Stampede, it's been a little bit of a trial by fire. But Stephanie's background is firmly in the digital asset space as well. She formerly worked at a company called Metal, which is a blockchain for banks and financial institutions, as well as Tassin, which is a local decentralized exchange with a compliance framework that is in Cheyenne. She's joins me in the Idleman, and we are already off to a strong start over the last couple of days. So welcome, Stephanie.
Welcome. Glad to have you on board.
And I don't think anyone's more happy than I am. I will also quickly note, we have been embarked on this hiring process. We do have a candidate for our Chief Risk Compliance Officer who has received a contract now. It is not signed. They are a little bit under the weather. Otherwise, I think they would be here this morning too. So hang tight and I'll have an answer for that shortly, but we'll announce in a public forum when the time is right. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to walk through today's agenda. We're ready for that.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So today we will, perhaps I'll revisit the CFO and CISO recruiting piece in a moment, but we'll go through meeting minutes from the last two discussions because we tabled those based on some of the way that our meetings had rolled out. We'll go through our monthly budget review, which has a bit of a different flavor to it because this is the first time we're reviewing it in this biennium. So there's a couple things I'll note on that. We'll share the contact list with you. Again, we keep that a little closer to the vest, but there's some context there that I want to point out. I will recap the discussion from the Select Committee on Blockchain. I testified this Monday morning. And we will go through our spending authority policy update. Now that we're in the new biennium, we have some more funding. Wanted to revisit that. And also because we're scaling the team, we're going to have more people on board. There will be more fees associated with SaaS services and other platforms. We'll go through our news update. a update on the subcommittee structure and getting those off the ground. We'll go through a launch update. So one of the things that Stephanie, in just a few days she's been here, has helped with is put the different pieces of our roadmap into a Gantt chart view with dependencies. So you can see a visualization of all of this. I will do my best to have that hosted on the screens behind us. I don't think we've done one of these before. We're sharing content, at least I haven't, that we're sharing content on the screens, but we'll give that a whirl. And then we'll go through some thoughts on the business plan before we dive into that as a subcommittee as well. And I think there may have been an issue with uploading that document, so we may have that one coming hot off the presses in a few minutes during this discussion. One other item we'll review together, which I don't think requires any kind of approval, but we'll certainly like your feedback on, is frequently asked questions. Since we're becoming a bit more out in public with this program, we do have questions coming in about what it is we're building, how does it differ from a cryptocurrency, and I wanted to have one place we could point to on our website where that's all made abundantly clear. So that is now on the website. I've also got a hard copy of it so you can review it, and we'll walk through that. Next steps, upcoming meetings, public comment, and then we'll wrap. And then, Chairman, you will be giving a talk at lunch, I believe.
That is correct, and I think auditor has a hard stop at
about 11. Here, I apologize.
Well, through the chair, Commissioner, you are a runner, so I probably wouldn't even notice it. Just be a puff of smoke that disappears and off to the races. So quickly, just before we move into the meeting minutes and all of that, a note on the CFO and the Chief Information Security Officer. So those positions are still open. We're still getting inbound on those. We have about 100 applicants for the CFO position, and we've got 100 applicants for the CISO position, about 53 applicants for the CFO position. So I've whittled those down based on some of the qualifications, and I'll be re-engaging some of the commissioners and members of the state treasurer's office to help review some of those, kind of divide and conquer and get in front of the right people in that capacity. And for the CISO side, we do expect to bring in some of our subject matter advisors from the technology subcommittee to help us really dig into the weeds on the experience that some of these people are bringing to the table. Because we all can talk the talk. I don't think any of us have really walked the walk when it comes to coding. We want to be very specific about seeing those capabilities in real time.
very good.
Excellent. So moving on through the reviews and approvals, we've got 2 sets of meeting minutes because we did spend last meeting predominantly in an executive session. We didn't take meeting minutes last time. And then the ones we're recapping are fairly skinny. So I'm happy to quickly review them and then would offer the commissioners to approve this either one at a time or in bulk, if that works for you and the commission.
Sure, hearing no objections.
Excellent.
Good.
Excellent. So to quickly review these, we had a meeting on July 18th. That one was chaired by Auditor Racines. And in terms of the topics for the day, that was our final review of the budget fiscal year end for 2023. So we had spent some time tabulating all the numbers and doing reconciliation to make sure that the starting balance we had for BFY 25 was correct. And we had a discussion about the waterfall and of when we start generating the underlying interest on the reserves we hold, where that's going to go. The net takeaway from that discussion was we should revisit that structure when it comes time to put our reserves management policy together, because there's some questions about the order of operations. We'll make sure we get that right. So that was one of the topics of discussion. Went through our standard kind of updates around news. And we went through a update to the hiring policy as well. So we had put one forward in May, and then this one, we took a couple lessons learned about confidentiality in the Wyoming Public Records Act, implemented the appropriate statutes into the hiring policy, also carved out a section for onboarding interns and approved that. Then we talked a little about the rulemaking, we talked about pre-qualifications, and that was the extent of that discussion. So if there's no questions on that, I'm happy to go through the minutes from the 15th as well, which are quite skinny.
it may be just because you touched that and I appreciate Auditor Racinas, I think Commissioner Racinas is chair of that particular meeting. Thank you. A note for the record that Commissioner Pope's joined us. I don't know what the pleasure of the board is. If you want us to pass those minutes, we can proceed to do that as necessary.
Yes, if you want, Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to pass the minutes, and then I'll present the next set separately, it's fine by me.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the minutes from July 18th, 2024.
Is there support for the auditor's motion?
Second.
It's been seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. And I also note that we have Commissioner Revelle on for the record. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
So on to the next batch. This would be our meeting minutes from August 15th. These ones are very lightweight because we've spent so much time in executive session. So essentially, we opened up the discussion. I gave a little bit of update about how that meeting would go. Importantly, Commissioner Naves did make a motion to create what was referred to at that point as the operational subcommittee, which is intended to essentially oversee the work that myself and the growing team are doing on a week-to-week basis. And that is comprised of Commissioner Naves, Commissioner Racinas, and Commissioner Pope as well. And I think the only thing I would note here is I think we've changed the name of it to the administrative committee because we have different operational committees. So just as a quick clarification, and we'll be meeting on 8:30 every Monday from here on out to make sure we're staying on track. Then we went into our executive session, popped back out 2 hours later and closed the meeting. That was not the extent of it.
And I would just note that, and I note in the minutes that the auditor did mention this, that there can be no actions taken in executive committee and they have to be under very specific guidelines to do on personnel, legal issues, et cetera, et cetera. So if I know these are copious and, you know, all the 3 pages, if anybody like to make a motion to support these.
Mr. Chairman, move approval of the minutes from August 15th, 2024.
Attacked by a microphone. So I'll set that aside for a moment and second the motion. And bring it back. I think it was Commissioner Wallace that caused that. I planted that.
Commissioner Pope seconded the Commissioner Racinas's motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays? I think that motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, may I have your leave to test this mic?
Of course.
Test. This one seems to be okay.
Just don't look at it.
Yes.
Might be too soon.
Was it on?
All right.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So continuing to move along here, the next document you have in front of you is our monthly budget review. We don't have a summary level yet just because there is such little information here to begin with. So essentially, this gives us the visibility for the first 2 months of BFY 25. The only real expenses you're going to see here are temporary salaries and benefits for myself and telecom charges for cell phone. That's pretty much, and reimbursements for, those are our first line on the back of the sheet. That's $76. That's the combination of Notion, Twitter, and OpenAI. So that's the recurring fees there. Of note, I still have to sit down with A&I and go through the bucketing on this. You'll notice that predominantly all of our funding is in the 900 series. So the goal will be to start allocating that proactively because we do know we're going to have certain charges around personnel, telecom. These are already repeating on here. So the expectation is we can start bucketing that a little more granularly and move forward from there. So nothing to approve on this one. Again, not much activity, but I have to get that in front of you because it just looks a little different until we start filling that.
Any questions? The director? Any questions? Hearing none? Thank you. Director?
Continue, thank you. Next up on the list is the contact list. Again, nothing really for us to go through here in any detail or granularity. This is just something that I like to provide to you on a monthly basis to give you an idea of how our conversations are going. And I know that I noticed some months ago that kind of flipped the cadence here, that instead of us reaching out proactively, people reaching out to us. And that's what we continue to see. I've spoken to over 600 people across 300 organizations since Thanksgiving of last year. About 70-ish+% of those are on the vendor side. That represents about 200 organizations. So there's certainly a lot of interest in building with us. And then there's also, as we've been a bit more vocal and in the public about the scope of this project, there's a growing amount of media in this milieu here, as well as people from the policy or regulatory side based on some of the conversations we're having and the events we're attending. So give you that context.
Thank you. Any questions? If there are none, I had one. And I want to thank Commissioner Revelle for his work on the SALT conference. I'm just curious if you had a tick-up of communications, reach outs, people talking to you after that conference.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. There's been a lot of dialogue with, I describe this kind of amorphously, different platform providers who I was certainly aware of, but we were not on their radar. Those connections have now been made, and I would expect them to be involved in the proposal process and put their names in the hat for the pre-qualification. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with the SALT team. I hope that, this was the first of hopefully many Wyoming blockchain symposiums.
Fantastic. Thanks.
So we will keep moving forward here. Next, just quick update from my side is the select committee discussion from this Monday morning when I gave my testimony. It was, again, fairly brief, as more of an update than anything else. The couple topics I touched on, one is the industry update, and I'll replay that in a second. We started talking about some of the news that's going on. In terms of personnel, I introduced Steph on that call as well and gave them the context about our Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, as well as where we are with the CFO and the CISO. I also mentioned what I'm referring to as our awareness campaign. Again, we're a little skittish about using the term marketing when it comes to talking about a product that doesn't exist yet, but we also can't build something, put it out into the ether, unintended, and then hope people know about it and that, they'll adopt it. So we need to find that balance. And I think we're at a point now where between events like the SALT conference, like this week at the Stampede, we're getting our name out there more and more. And that's part of a kind of a broader effort to be more vocal about the work we're doing. I'd also know that we went through some next steps, but the cadence, we'll talk a lot more in detail about that later this morning. But the one thing I wanted to mention is I always like to kind of replay any of the questions that are asked of myself or the commission while we're on the dais there. I think the only question we got was from Representative Western, who serves as the co-chair, regarding any kind of dialogue we were having, or not dialogue we were having rather, but expectations around our go-to-market and that marketing effort vis-a-vis agencies that may want to have oversight of us. And I responded kind of based on my prior experience where I was working on a security token with an NBA athlete, a tokenized bond. So pretty much every tweet and every post had to go through some level of legal scrutiny before we put it out there. So perhaps we're looking at something similar to that. Perhaps we don't need to be that granular about things, but that is certainly a thought I'm aware of and a process I'm familiar with. So more to come on that as we get closer. But again, I always like to replay what I hear in those conversations to this audience as well.
Any questions? Okay.
And Governor, if I may,
Commissioner Navis.
thank you. Now, I just want to thank the Attorney General's office for its partnership and guidance to the commissioners and to Anthony on the engagement with external regulators. As Anthony mentioned, we have been doing an outreach to certain regulators to have this conversation. so that nothing is a surprise and nothing is potentially a question down the road. And Devin, particularly in the Attorney General's office, has been really helpful in guiding us in these engagements and making sure that the commission is being advised on how to proceed from a legal perspective. So I appreciate the engagement from the AG's office.
Thank you, Commissioner. In your informed perspective, does it make sense to, at some point, I think we're premature at this point, but does it make sense to have an invitation to invite people to come to Wyoming and have those conversations?
We are actually, so Anthony may have mentioned that he attended a conference and had some in-person meetings, through at this conference with certain agencies. And we are now being introduced the respective offices into one of these agencies, right? The offices are the ones that are going to deal with either innovation or legislative and policy updates, not necessarily any other office within these regulators. So we will be having these introductions, and it may be prudent down the road to have an in-person meeting with them. But I would agree with you, Governor, that is not at this time. We're still in very exploratory engagement with these agencies. And at the time in which we believe that there is a good path of conversation, then we may potentially invite them to come and visit us in person and see what we're doing. But the response has been, of willingness to engage with us and to learn more. And again, the offices in which we're speaking with are offices of innovation and legislative and policy updates.
You, Commissioner, Director, any additional?
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, it was a little hard to hear you, but I think just to get the point across, it really does come down to meeting the right team. These agencies are vast. They interlink with each other. Commissioner Navas mentioned the event that I was at with Mr. Kenny in DC last week, which was extremely helpful. Again, I'm familiar with the bad actors in this space. I'm familiar with the types of scams in this space. Getting to see how these different agencies work with each other to prevent that illicit activity was net new to me. And I think very helpful when we start thinking about how we balance putting a stable token forward that respects the personal privacy of those using it, but also precludes or prevents against illicit activity. We'll need to find that balance, and that's where these people live in that balance. So I think it was a very productive use of our time to get in front of some of these folks.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to move on to our next item here, which is the spending authority policy. So you should have two copies in front of you. One is clean, one is track changes. There's not a tremendous amount of red line here. Essentially, if you drop down to the bottom of the first page and then on the back, what I'm trying to do here is change some of the limits that we had on this while we had a much tighter budget. So through June of this year, bless you, Devin, we had a $500,000 budget, and we had some pretty tight allowances here that reflected that. And that being said, we're not looking to, just because we have 10x the cash, make it 10x limiter. I would argue that we're always going to have a very conservative fiscal view on all of this. But we do have some rationale for wanting to increase these numbers. So if you go to this section called direct payments, it talks about any one-time payment to a vendor approved by the state in an amount up to, used to be $1,000. I've changed that to $3,000. To give you an example of those metrics, these direct payments, an example of that would be the commission paying for a Microsoft Office license. So those are several $100s a piece, and you multiply 5 employees by a $468 annual SaaS purchase, then you get 2,400 already. We had a 6th person who gets software. You're already at that threshold. So that's where that came from in the direct payments capacity. Moving to prepayments. This is the use of the prepaid card known as the P card. I think most state employees have these. That allows, instead of having to go through the reimbursement process, just swipe the card and you're entitled to some amount every month. Initially, this was $240 a month with a $240,000 annual limit. We actually drafted this before I received my P card. When I got the P card from A&I had a $2,500 one-time purchase limit and a $2,500 monthly limit. No, $2,500 purchase or weekly limit, I believe it is. So we were already kind of out of line with that. I don't foresee us needing to go up that high for the for every month. But I do think essentially doubling this from about 200 from 240 to 500 would cover us on any of the SaaS services, the kind of recurring fees as we scale the team, and potentially use platforms like Notion for the subcommittees. We'll have to bring in all of the other commissioners, subject matter advisors. This would give us coverage, and then the 6K would be for the whole fiscal year. So that would be 500 times 12. That's the math on that. And then I didn't touch anything for professional services. Professional services is pretty well governed by the existing process that's in place through A&I. We have our own procurement process we could follow, which has the same financial thresholds. This was meant, if we think back to when this was passed by the commission, this was intended to cover any kind of payment to a vendor who perhaps did just a slight additional book of work for us or went over on budget, and we just wanted to kind of assuage that and give the director the ability to kind of pay that off and kind of move on with life. That was the goal behind that, but I didn't change anything about the fees for professional services. So what we're looking at here is two areas where we are increasing the amounts that the executive director is able to reimburse or authorize for payment without having to go to the commission to accomplish that.
Thank you. Commissioner Racine, you were reaching for the mic.
Mr. Chairman, I think the changes are appropriate. I feel silly I didn't catch this the first time around. When we do move to approve this, under C, prepayments, we should really, and then prepaid card, that's it's not really a prepayment, that's a purchasing, that P card stands for purchasing card. So I would maybe move to change the heading prepayments to purchasing card, and then in number 1, just strike prepaid and put purchasing. Does that make sense? Yeah. And again, I am surprised that didn't jump out at me the first time. That's minor, just technical.
Thank you. Is there support for the auditors amendment language? Commissioner Pope.
Yes. Second.
It's seconded. Okay. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pope.
while we're making changes, I would also move that at the top of page 1, the policy title spending authority policy. That should be as amended September 19th, 2024, as opposed to adopted, because the original adoption was on November 16th, as stated, or as redlined there.
Support for Commissioner Pope's
Second.
been seconded. Further discussion, further comment? I hear none. We have a proposed policy that's been amended that is forward. I would be happy if somebody wanted to move it.
I would move the policy as amended, Mr. Chairman.
Been moved. Is there a second? Been seconded by Commissioner Pope. I'll note for the record that Commissioner Meyer has joined us. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? That motion carries. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Auditor. Thank you, Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to our next topic here, stable token industry update. We'll keep this one perhaps a little quicker than usual, just keep moving here. But first and foremost, the stable token industry is at an all-time high. We've now surpassed about $170 billion of stable tokens in circulation, which is fantastic. There also was a research report that I shared with the commission, I believe is on our website. I may have to stick it there as well. From the report comes from Castle Island Ventures, a gentleman named Nick Carter, also with assistance from Visa and Brevin Howard Digital. So they created a report called Stablecoins, the Emerging Market Story. They surveyed 2,500 people across Nigeria, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, and India, about 500 people in those jurisdictions regarding stablecoin and stable token usage. So a couple of stats to throw out as a result of that. Almost 70% have converted a local currency to a stablecoin. 39% have used stablecoins for cross-border payments, and 34% of 18 to 24-year-olds convert local fiat to stablecoins on a weekly basis. I didn't jot down the exact number, but I also saw in the report that about 50% of people are using stablecoins for the purpose of storing their wealth in something that's not their local currency because they're concerned about inflation or other similar kind of concerns about the solidness of banks there. So that was a great report. If it's on the website already, I'll get that up shortly. And I think all the commissioners have that for your own perusal. Keeping with the international theme for a moment, there was also a report in Bloomberg that from the Bank of Russia, they now are looking to implement a full-scale digital ruble operation by July of 2025. So that would include all banks as well as retail utilizations for a digital ruble. So if that comes to pass, and I do take these things with a grain of salt, that would be a pretty big shift in how their economy works. I'd also note that internationally, Revolut, which is a European-based payment processor similar to PayPal or Venmo, they are now, and I think it was just this morning, announced their stablecoin. So we're continuing to see some of these payment incumbents expand their remit into the stable token realm. We'll keep an eye on that one as well. In terms of what's happening here in the US, Circle just moved their headquarters to the World Trade Center. I would expect a IPO is not far behind. And there was a, perhaps this is more incumbent than it's domestic, but there was a fairly lengthy article in the Wall Street Journal about Tether and its use in illicit funding. So that I shared with the commission as well. Just a good primer on some of the, risks that we need to be aware of and mitigate as we're building the token from the ground up. I'd also say that there was, we continue to hear about digital assets being used for illicit funding. We've talked to folks like Ari Redboard, who joined us in November from TRM Labs, about how small of a number that is in the grand scheme of things, to be under 1% if you talk to any of the on-chain analytics teams. So the Wall Street Journal at least had wherewithal to balance the article about Tether with an article about Iraq's funding of Iran through US bank rails. So that was another lengthy article that was posted. So less about stable tokens, but still very much looking into the movement of money all around the world. So I'll leave the news there for now. Are there any questions on those ongoings?
Questions? Any further comments? If there are none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now we will roll into our subcommittee update. So you should have a piece of paper that looks familiar. We went through a version of this a couple months back, and I've now updated this with some of these final structures that are coming into place now that we're doing our outreach for these subcommittees off the ground. So just to kind of recap the structure that we're talking about here. Before we get into subcommittees proper, we do have kind of a rules on rules group, which will go across technology, legal, finance, and operations verticals. If you were to look at something like the legal rulemaking group, that would reflect what we did for our procurement rules, for example. We know that we need to have rules around reserves management. We know we need to have rules around how the token itself operates. and we have a kind of a top level grouping for all of that. As we dig further into the structure here, again, the subcommittees of tech, legal, finance, operations, each of those have subsidiary working groups they're under. And just to kind of give a recap of where they are currently. So from the token design perspective, Flavia has taken the lead on that one with support from Commissioner Pope and Commissioner Rebel. We've got 5 people lined up to join us who have very deep expertise and hands-on work in digital assets. And they are going to help us look at all the different features of the token that we should be ascertaining as we look to build it out with partners that we're going to go through the procurement song and dance with. And then we've also got a parallel group in the tech subcommittee for blockchain selection. So we've talked a bit about what these different chains can accomplish. There's still updates coming out every day about what their capabilities are. So this group is intended to kind of keep us informed on those developments and help guide our thinking around where we want to do that V1 launch. Again, we do have a remit from the state legislature to be multi-chain. However, we do need to start somewhere. And the goal would be to work with this working group to ascertain where that place is. And I will start on quickly. Well, we do have specific verticals we're talking about here. These all do blend with each other to a certain extent. So we start talking about the tech stack for a given blockchain. There's also going to be implicit legal considerations in there around how the validator nodes are structured, how much control we do or don't have. These are all things that we need to assess as we continue to develop the thinking around the Wyoming stable token. Moving over to the legal side, we've got a working group on regulatory alignment and another on internal controls. So we've done the reach outs for these as for the regulatory alignment working group. And again, Commissioner Navas is spearheading that one. This one, I'll note, will be staffed in totality by internal resources. This is because this is going to be a legal function. We will have privileged information involved, so we're not going to be inviting any subject matter advisors to this one. And then when we get into internal controls as well, we will have Commissioner Pope and Commissioner Racines leading the way on that one. It's possible we may want to tag in our state external auditor, those conversations as well, and get the ball rolling there when the time is right. And Commissioner Racines, I got to defer to you on that one, just based on where the ACFR is and the schedule for that. Moving on to the finance side of things. This is where we're going to talk about both revenue projections in one working group and the accounting treatment in another. So we'll likely hold off on the revenue projections for a while until we get our CFO on board. The expectation is this would kind of be step one for them following onboarding. And then Commissioner Wallace, we'd look to work with you on this one. And along with some of the resources from the State Treasurer's Office to support. This, I think, will be fairly heavily focused on scenario modeling. We know that there's a series of variables we need to consider, which chains we're launching on, the market dynamics there, where the interest rates are, which use cases we're pursuing. So we'll need to kind of have series inside of series and variables, a set of variables, and we'll figure all that out. The accounting treatment, again, Commissioner Racines, we'd like to work with you on that one, perhaps tag an MHP there as well. And Commissioner Pope, you would certainly be involved with that one. And then the operational subcommittee, we've got 2 working groups. One is the business plan, and the other is formerly procurement, now procurement and integrity. Again, I think we've done all the reach out for these. So we'd look to get these stood up pretty quickly as well. From the procurement and integrity piece, this initially was focused and still described as being focused on the pre-qualifications and the RFPs, and that will be the ultimate deliverable of this working group. That being said, as I've had conversations with some of these people who would be involved as SMAs, their take is that, this is an opportunity for, as we're kind of putting the pieces together, really put a strict lens on some of the non-technical and quasi-technical pieces of the operation, physical security, not, sharding a private key itself, but who's holding those shards and thinking around that. So we'll make sure that is part of the conversation as well. We'll get this off the ground. And I believe, and I'm going to turn to our newly minted PM on this one. I do believe we have all the outreach done for the tech and operations group. And the legal, on the legal side, the regulatory alignment group as well. Excellent, thank you. Finance, again, we'll wait till we get our CFO on board, but the rest of these we are looking to get off the ground as early as next week from a recurring meeting perspective. Any questions on that?
Questions? Doesn't it here? So be great.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the organization.
Thank you. And well, we're going to talk organization. We'll see how our next deliverable goes. So this is the roadmap and timelines. So I worked with Stephanie and I really want to give her my gratitude for hitting the ground running on this. We had one day of getting office supplies and then 3 days making sure that we've got all of this together. So it's all together in Notion. And then the goal is to work through that platform and give the commissioners visibility there as well. Of course, in a way that makes sure we don't have an electronic quorum. So we'll map all that out. But the goal is to have tasks be visible in real time at a granular level to the commission, something I've talked about before, but now we're actually at the point where we're putting it all together. So I am going to try a first for myself in these commission meetings, which is to share my screen on Zoom and do it that way. So give me one moment here. Right, if anything goes wrong, feel free to just let me know. Couple windows closed. That may not be the most visible thing. From where you're sitting, but I'm happy to walk through it. And staff, I think we want the timeline view. I'm gonna do. Okay. Very much how we put it in. Okay, so the way we've done this, which I will admit looks slightly different than it did last night when we went through it, is we've created 4 key buckets. One is procurement, another is rulemaking, a third is marketing, and another is operations. So I think we'll start with the procurement side of things because this is where we've talked a lot about in the past. We've promulgated our emergency rules for the procurement session. First goal here is to launch subcommittees, and then what I'm doing here is expanding all of these different objectives into subtasks, and you have this Gantt chart view where you can see all of these different steps in real time and the duration they're going to take, which I think will give a lot of clarity about where we are and where we're moving to. So from this perspective, we've already shared draft groupings with commissioners. We are in the process of confirming commissioners and subject matter advisor schedules. Importantly, we are requiring our subject matter advisors to sign the code of conduct that was generated some time ago and is still in play. So before anyone can join up, we make sure that we've got those. And then we will create the recurring meetings for those working groups and launch the subcommittees. Again, the goal for us is to get started with the technology and the ops side as early as Monday. All of these tasks has different windows, you get more context, and it gets a little bit fractalized when you start doing that. But to kind of just keep going through the cadence here, the goal is to then move into publishing vendor pre-qualification forms. So that'll be kind of a key objective of the subcommittees pretty much from the get-go, right? We want to make sure that we stay on this cadence to launch early next year. And doing that will require who's in the crowd and making sure that we've got templates together for pre-qualifications. So we're comparing apples to apples and then actually drafting those pre-qualifications as well. The thought here is, again, I know this is a little difficult to see from where you're all sitting, but the goal here is to work with the subcommittees to get these, we call VPFs, vendor pre-qualification forms, drafted by our next commission meeting on October 24th, at which point we would present them to the commission, hopefully approve them at that discussion, and then we would essentially the next day dive right into getting those published and making sure that the many 200+ companies that have expressed interest have those VPFs available to them, can fill them out and start sending them back. And we can start tightening the funnel around the qualifications of some of these groups that have reached out, or we've had conversations along the way. So. Again, these things have kind of moved around a little bit, but once those submissions of pre-qualification forms start coming in, we can review them on a rolling basis through the subcommittees. The terminology we've used in the past is evaluation committee. I think we could use those things kind of interchangeably here, where we've got essentially a group of qualified subject matter advisors or experts who can help us review all of this content. And we'll do that on a rolling basis. The goal would be to receive all of those pre-quals by November 12th. Make sure we have time to review them again on a rolling basis throughout, up until our meeting on November 21st, where we would make a kind of determination of who we're going to bring on to the next stage. And also what we could do is concurrently develop our RFPs, because there is a little bit of math here backing into the pre-qualification. To know what we need to pre-qualify someone for, we need to know what the end product is going to be. So we also want to make sure, again, we're moving fairly expeditiously. So the goal would be to start developing the RFPs in tandem with the pre-qualifications, but we would have an extra month to develop the RFPs and have all of this kind of come together at the end of November at our next meeting on the 21st. That would give us an idea of, again, who's qualified and who we would be inviting into the RFP process. We would approve the candidates, we would approve the RFP, and then we'd give them a decent amount of time to actually complete the RFP, because we're going to have the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's. So I think we gave them from late November until the first week of January to get that done. Again, it's escaping me at this very second. That's the cadence there. Then, of course, we have a period where we would need to review as a commission or with subcommittees or evaluation committees, review the pre-qualifications that come in, determine who we want to interview, facilitate those interviews over a certain amount of time, and then make a selection of who we want to engage in negotiations with. We expect those negotiations to take about a month, all said and done. So there it is. So again, we've got these all in this chart now, so we can see flow and the timeliness and the dependencies here. This will be shared with everybody, so you'll have the ability to kind of play around with yourself. So I know I was kind of jumping around a little bit, but does that all make sense when it comes to vendor process and procurement?
It makes sense to me. Are there questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there we go.
Is that Commissioner Alves?
Yes. Can you hear
Commissioner.
me? I know that Anthony said it wasn't clear before. I just want to make sure you guys can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. All right. So, Anthony, could you just, I'm looking at this on my computer screen. I apologize. It's quite small, but could you please point me to the qualified vendor submission RFPs and so why are we starting again on November 22nd and going into January 6th for that task? I'm a little confused about that. I thought that we're going to start that a little bit sooner.
So, to the chair, Commissioner Navas, to be specific, if we have pre-qualifications, if we have pre-qualifications, let's see, Commissioner Navas, I'm having audio difficulties right now. Give me 1 second. Maybe this works for me. Okay. Sorry, I'm making a vote. So Commissioner Navas, let me make sure I understand the question. Question is, why are we starting the RFPs that late? Is that the question?
Yeah, because I know that we're going to start the subcommittees next week. We're going to start meeting. We're going to have the subject matter experts come in and contribute, develop the RFP process, and then publish it. So I'm just trying to understand, so we're projecting that this is gonna take 2 months between now and then? Is that why we're starting this on November 22nd?
Commissioner Navas, to be very clear, that is not us starting the drafting of the RFPs. That is when the vendors who have been qualified by the commission through the pre-qualification process can start submitting their RFPs. So we have a separate step for the drafting of RFPs, which would start on September 23rd. So the goal would be, as you alluded to start drafting the RFPs as early as Monday.
Okay, and then because of required published timelines, then they would only be able to start submitting it on November 22nd. Is that why?
That's through the chair. That's correct. There's a combination of the submission timelines, but also the pre-qualifications, right? We're not, the request for proposal process, as we've designed it through the procurement rules that were promulgated, the RFP process is not open to every participant who wants to be involved in the RFP. The pre-qualification is, but we've structured it such that when we get to the very robust and detailed request for proposal, we're only talking to third parties that we believe can accomplish the goals based on our pre-qualifications of them. And that pre-qualification process, our drafting of those pre-quals runs from the 23rd of September to October 21st. And then we would need to actually send the pre-qualifications to those people, get their responses, review them, and then make the determination of who would be invited to the RFP process on November 21st, at which point we'd also have the RFPs ready through that longer tail of development. And we would come out of our meeting right before Thanksgiving, where we have, here's the RFPs, here's the people who are able to reply to them. We give them time to build. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out the timeline and how many consecutive steps we're gonna take and what those steps are and how we ensure that we are tracking them the right manner. I'm looking at this and you're probably better versed in all of the requirements for submission of RFPs than I am. But for me, my goal is, again, as we discussed, that if this is going to be a Q1 25 public issuance, and we still need these vendors lined up, coordinated and tested prior to issuance, I'm just looking at these dates in here and ensuring that we're actually going to be able to meet that Q1 25 deadline. Is that what we're tracking against?
So through the chair, one of the things, Commissioner Navas, that we'll go through is we do expect to have everybody engaged by end of Q1. I can certainly start building, and if it's a matter of putting something out there very rapidly, I think we could do that. I think when you start seeing some of the other dependencies, there may be a longer tail for things like rulemaking, which itself will take 4 to 5 months. So for things like reserves management and the token launch. So I think there's certainly levers we could pull. And again, we could certainly get something out and perhaps on test nets by Q1. The consideration is always going to be how much do we want to test it before we have a fully reserved stable token out in the wild that once it's out there, it's out there. But I think we can certainly still keep aiming for the Q1 date. And I think when we get to the point of where we talk about where vendors would be engaged, that's the plan. I'd also mention, if it is the will of the commission to do so, we're targeting dates around our monthly meetings. If the commission felt that they wanted to accelerate some of these processes and have special meetings at a more rapid cadence, like we did when we brought on a third-party consultant to help us with some of the legal diligence that we're doing, that was done through a special session. That is, I'll leave it to the commission to determine that, but I think that is a potentiality to accelerate things further.
Yeah, I think it's something for us as a commission to discuss and review. Again, just understanding, at least under my perspective and my single perspective alone, putting something on testnet is not issuing a token. The issue token is the one that is going to be launched in a public blockchain and issued to our distributing partners. The other ones are just testing mechanisms to ensure that we're doing our job and having checked everything that we had to do. So I just wanted to make sure that we stayed aligned and we're tracking these dates accordingly. A couple of things have taken a little bit longer than we anticipated in the past, and it will take the time that it needs to take to be done correctly. As we discussed earlier, accuracy is not going to be compromised by speed, never will. However, if there are things that we need to do or pay attention to continue striving in good faith to issue this token, I want to make sure that we do. So for me, it's just understanding the steps that we're going to take forward, how we're scaling them, how we're tracking them, and how we're ensuring that we're working towards that public issuance in next year.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Racines, thank you, Commissioner Naves.
Anthony, please remind me how many RFPs we're going to be issuing total?
Through the chair, Commissioner Racines, I think it'd be at least 5.
And my office recently issued 5 months ago, and wow, it is extremely painful. It's super important. However long we think it's going to take, it's going to take longer, and it's a step in the process that really costs you later if you don't put the work in up front. And again, I not trying to sound like, oh, it's the government slow. It's not even that. It's just doing an RFP extremely challenging. Took our office, easily 3 months to put together RFP, and that was for something that had been done. We had, and these are a lot of things that we're not totally in the dark, but so I just want to make sure we set expectations that it's not happening in 2 months. And I would love more than anything to be proven wrong, but I think that's maybe a little too aggressive of a goal, speaking to the overall timeline. So just to be protective of Anthony and the new people that we are bringing on.
And Director, Commissioner Naves, any comment? Director.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to what Commissioner Racines just said, hear you loud and clear. I will say, or just maybe just for the context, I don't think all of the RFPs will be created equal either. I think we're going to have, of those 3, of the 5, 3 of them would be fairly straightforward. We need a financial auditor to audit our finances. We need a code auditor to audit the code, and we need a on-chain analytics team to look at the on-chain analytics. Those will all be pretty straightforward, I would think. I will say the complexity that would be removed from those would likely go into the one for the actual technical build out, where we're in need, kind of one consortium to bring us forward with developing a smart contract, an exchange to list it on, a digital wallet to use so people can self-custody, a mobile application. That's going to be a bit more complex for that one.
Okay, and Director, I as I was listening to this, I share many of the same concerns. I do know that we are eager to proceed, and the question I guess I came to is I sort of understand the concurrent development of the RFP and the pre-qualifications. My question is, do we need to take as much time on the pre-qualifications? Are those going to be relatively self-evident? Is that a fairly quick process? And I think in terms of tracking on timelines, which I really like the Gantt charts here, and thank you, staff, for doing that. Being able to show diligence and progress and reasonable timelines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm happy to kind of continue putting whatever granularity we need in this and continuing to flesh it out. In response to your question about accelerating the pre-qualifications, I think the short answer is yes. They're going to be pretty broad strokes, right? When we look at, technology partners, we're going to need to look at ones that have processed significant numbers of transactions, significant transaction volume. If you're looking at different chains, would be referred to as what's total value locked, which is how much money is on a chain and staying there. The higher that number is without getting hacked, the more secure the platform you can hypothesize. So I think we have a pretty good idea of what some of these metrics need to be. And if it was the will of the commission to accelerate the pre-qualifications instead of trying to peg it to the next meeting on the 21st, if we would be a little sooner than that, I would be happy to work with the subcommittees and the commissioners to accomplish that.
So that, director, is good news. And I would also anticipate that in the discussion about pre-qualifications and the conversation that then brings forth, that would help inform the RFP. And so this could work fairly quickly. I don't want to speak for the commission, but, I do feel a sense of urgency on this. And so if there are logical steps and we need to do, special sessions that can be quite short, very specific, I'm not opposed to trying to make that happen. I think we can kind of walk around here to the other commissioners to see if that's a problem, but I think we all share kind of that hope. Is that a fair comment, Commissioner Pope? Speak into your microphone.
Okay, if I at some point can get the microphones right. What I'd like to know and what I'd like to see is a list of variables at each of our timeline steps that would increase the risk that the timeline will be extended. And that's I think that's a good way to look at this so that we can see if there are other resources that need to be applied or other steps that need to be taken in order to avoid those risks. And like I said, maybe we take this up in the administrative subcommittee in order to make those determinations. But I think that's something I would feel more comfortable with this timeline if I knew those risks and associated variables.
Commissioner, I note that Commissioner Navis's hand is raised, so I'll recognize Commissioner Navis.
Thank you, Governor. David said much what I was about to say. And focus and actually reiterating what you're saying, Governor. There's some sense of urgency in working through this, keeping a timeline that is progressing in good faith. I mean, the legislature, gave us a approval to continue working on this last year, noting that we were actually working towards that issuance. And I want to make sure that we observe our mandate in good faith. The administrative subcommittee that David, Christy, and I are part of is there to support Anthony and the executive team in meeting those timelines. But to your point, Governor, all of the decisions need to be made by the commission as a whole. The subcommittee is just there to enable Anthony to continue moving forward and progressing in the timeline as anticipated. So I, for one, will not have objections of meeting more frequently besides the monthly meeting, to ensure that we're again meeting our legislative mandate and ensuring that the timeline is progressing as planned. And again, with accuracy, not compromising speed, but as planned to ensure that we meet our mandate. But thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wallace, did I see you have a comment or no? Okay. Any further comments? Director, thanks. I hope that gives you a sense.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all feel a sense of urgency on this one. So again, happy to do what we did when we engaged external contractors around the legal side of things. Exactly what we did. We got a 30-minute meeting on the calendar, tagged in, voted and tagged out. So I think if we want to go that route, we can certainly do so. And Commissioner Pope, through the chair, I've got good news, which is as a member of the admin committee, you should have access to go into all of these tasks and start putting those risks in there. I'll be on the lookout for them tomorrow. That being said, in all seriousness, if we're comfortable with the general procurement cadence and perhaps knowing we want to accelerate that, we'll go through the rest of these pieces, acknowledging that we want to kind of stick to the faster pace here. So I think next up would be rulemaking. This one is very straightforward. Again, through our reconstitution of the subcommittees here, we look to get rulemaking done and fairly soon, because we do know this is a robust process. We do have drafting rules will take some time. And there's some steps in the process that we have. Pardon me, we know we have things like a 45-day public comment period that are going to make things a little lengthier. So there's, again, 3 buckets. There's the procurement side of things. We already have the emergency procurement rules in place. We do need to file those for the regular rulemaking process. And I'm happy to work with the AG's office and Secretary of State's office and all of that. The other 2 categories are reserve management rules and token treatment rules. I know we talked about it a number of times before, but just for everyone in the room, the goal here is to promulgate a set of rules around how we manage the underlying reserves of the token. We have an excellent starting point in our statute, cash, treasuries, repos that are short duration. But we do need to probably be a bit more specific about who's handling those redemption models and those kind of things. And we have some good starting points too between guidance from the New York Department of Financial Services. We've got the federal legislation that's been proposed around stablecoins has focused on the reserves side of things. So there's some things we could learn from those best practices and lift and shift and put our own tweaks in there where we need to. And then I had also mentioned that the token treatment rules would probably be a more nuanced and unique endeavor. This is where we'll need to actually define how the token will be minted and issued, any kind of burning or redeeming functions, freeze and seize or interdiction. We'll need to define all of that. And we have those at a high level because the assumption is when our chief risk and compliance officer comes on, they'll be fairly heads down on this from the get-go. It would be this and their relationship were highlighted with the subcommittees, and that would be pretty much it. I don't expect them to have anything else, and to the extent that they do, I would do my damnedest to make sure that was my responsibility and not theirs. So again, we look to start that pretty quick. We do have a 45-day comment period that's built into all of this, but we would look to get those, I think, done by March 14th. I think it's saying May 1st. Why? But I will look into that. It should be mid-March. Sorry. Any questions on the rulemaking process?
Questions? Questions? Commissioner Naves has raised her hand.
Thank you, Governor Anthony. Again, I'm sorry, it's just me having my screen be really small and looking at the dates.
Sure.
So the rulemaking process, can this run in parallel with any one of the other processes? Or does it needs to stand apart from it and be consecutive?
So through the chair, Commissioner Naves, apologies that you can't see this. I think you should have, if you don't, let me know, I'll make sure you have it. Through the administrative committee, you should have access to at least view this, if not edit it yourself. But we do start these processes concurrently. These are starting at the same time that the subcommittees are kicking off.
Okay, because I know that is a lengthier process, and I want to make sure that we give the time that is needed to be given. So the sooner that we started, then we could meet that deadline by the time of issuance, public issuance. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Further comments? Questions? None. Okay.
Continuing to move on, we'll go into the marketing side of things, which again, Commissioner Navas can certainly run concurrently with some of the other efforts. One thing we've talked about is token trademark and copyrights. There's kind of a number of steps in here. I've talked about the AG's office. I think the commission will need to make a determination what we want to call the token. I know we've been referring to it as WIST for the time being, but perhaps we want to put some other thoughts around that. And there's mechanics that we can go and get the trademark for the token name. Just to be clear, in case it's not like a known thing, when people issue tokens on chain, they can enter in whatever metadata they want. So if this was Circle, which uses the ticker USDC, there's no shortage of people that could create a token on the blockchain with the ticker USDC. The way Circle defends against that is by having a protected trademark. So they can go after that in the court. I assume we'd be doing the same thing here, with whatever ticker and visual design mark that we pick. So that's kind of on the marketing side. We've also got, echoing what I said earlier, this awareness campaigns kind of just broadly from, where we were at SALT to the kind of the end of Q1. And then the go-to-market approach has some more detail in there around social media and outreach, internal planning, and then working with vendors that we've engaged to be part of the marketing process. I do think, and this is where I just kind of referring back to a comment I made a few minutes ago, when we talk about the RFPs for the technical side, it's possible that the platforms we're talking to or would be talking to have a tremendous sum of users on them, and they could very easily implement a marketing campaign into their existing content structure and audience, and perhaps it'd be easier for us to plug in there than building from scratch ourselves. So that's certainly something that we're considering as we're moving forward through all of this. Any questions on the marketing side of things?
Yeah, this is Kurt. Just one, I know one of the things that you do, I guess, in the political realm is you get every possible domain or I guess that people could actually try to counterfeit your intent. So I would say is that on the trademark side, throw everything against the wall and we'll come back and you're probably gonna have to keep those trademarks, all active. Otherwise you can get things that are counterfeit. So you're probably gonna have, maybe 5, maybe 25 different trademarks that you want to, I guess, protect, because you don't want anything that looks anything like what we're contemplating. So I would say that's if you're going to protect our integrity, that's I think the only way or one way that you can do it. Just looking at the reality of people trying to counterfeit something that might be successful, and people are probably already doing it now if they're thinking about it.
The director, you want to respond?
Through the chair. Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Fully agree with you on that. I think we're going to be, when we go to approve, the commission goes to approve whichever marks and whatever descriptions they want to file, whatever class they're going to be in, I would probably make the argument we would need to be ready to kind of pull the trigger on those filings once that decision is made, because these are public meetings and someone could just file the same thing if we hesitate to do it. So certainly a different than usual, but definitely a threat model I've thought of myself. So and so has the AG too. So we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, if we're going to wait to March to do that, or February of next year, we're going to be way too late. So I mean, just yeah, I'm becoming to get really frustrated that if we're not going to even get into some of these things until March, I'm not sure when we're going to do our stress testing on this. And I can't really see the timeline right now, but that's something that yeah, I'm really beginning to get a little frustrating about the speed of this. I think concurrently, I think if we're going to do these things concurrently, we've got to put, I guess, into an extreme effort into all of these different concurrent areas at the same time, and yeah, okay, thank you.
Director.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, again, a point well taken. I know it's a little difficult to see on your side, but we do have the token trademark and copyright piece running from essentially next week through October and trying to knock it out within the course of a month. I don't think this makes it until, there's no need to drag this on until next year. And I'd also add that I think things will start moving exponentially faster with more than one pair of hands in the agency here. And then Steph has already done a tremendous job of helping accelerate some of this. So I think we'll start moving in a much more rapid rate going forward.
Very good. Further comment? All right.
And then. Oh. Okay. Thank you. See, adding value already. Last piece on here is operations and token launch. Well, we've got some other things on here first. So we've got, again, the hiring we're looking to do. Hopefully by the end of November, we could bring on a chief information security officer and a chief financial officer. I mentioned those earlier in the discussion that we are still getting inbound applications for those roles. But I'm looking to work with the commissioners and the treasurer's office to start triaging some of the CFO applications and looking to work with some of our subject matter advisors for the CISO side of things. Another thing we've added on here, create internal agency policies. This is something that we've put on here as a placeholder. I don't think we need to over-engineer this, but we are still candidly a very new agency that has not adopted its own policies in many cases. That should allow us to rely on some others that are out there, of course. But I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything as we create what is a fairly novel product, for lack of a better term. So working perhaps with other agencies that may look like ours that are a body politic and a corporate entity and instrumentality, to get a better idea of what their policies look like and to the extent that we should be lifting and shifting from existing best practices and saving ourselves some time while also kind of fortifying the operations of the organization. I will spend some time on that before the end of the year. Any thoughts on that?
Comments?
Okay. And then just two last things on here. I know we had token launch. We had that on May 26th. I think some of the linkages may have been broken. But we made sure that we want to get this done by Q1 of 2025. So that's May, not March. Okay. So something got a little funky there, but the goal is to get this out sooner rather than later. And the other deliverable that's required ahead of the token launch is a report that is due to the select committee ahead of launch. So this is similar to the statutory requirement we had in the initial Stable Token Act, where when we were endeavoring to issue a token by December 31st of last year, we did have a report due November 1st to ascertain whether or not we could do it, and perhaps things like the token's potential status as a security or not, and go from there. But those timelines were well delineated. So from this perspective, this is more ambiguous timeline, simply says before we launch a token. We did amend the Stable Token Act during the budget session this year to clarify that the report will precede a fully reserved token. So we don't need to issue these for test tokens or things like, as Commissioner Navas mentioned earlier, may not have as much oomph behind them. They're just, we want to make sure we get one done for the real thing. If there happened to, I don't know what and Mr. Chairman, I don't know what the practice would be for this, but if there was anyone in the room who may have had an idea about timelines, he's no longer here. Never mind. So I'm going to put Senator Rothfuss on the spot, see if he had any.
Right. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I would also suggest too, as we discuss this and the urgency, that understanding that there is a regulatory framework that's somewhat nascent at this point, and we have a big election coming up that probably precludes some concrete action for at least a little bit. I think this is your comments are well placed. So,
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Wallace.
Just I heard you saying the admin committee has access to this spreadsheet on Notion. Is that available to the whole committee or just the admin committee?
So through the chair, and thank you, Commissioner Walls, it should be available to everybody. I just need to be careful about view access versus edit access for the purposes of avoiding quorum online. So if you can't see it, and I don't think you do right now, but I will make sure you have access to all this, and then everyone will have access to all this.
Okay.
And that way, you know, to the extent that I don't think we could do like comments either, but if you're looking at something and you see something that looks off or not connected, or to Commissioner Pope's point from earlier, something has a risk dependency that we're not highlighting appropriately, tell me, put it in, of
Great. Thank you.
course. And before we wrap up, I will also just mention that if you prefer to look at it in not the Gantt chart view, we also have it in just a table view as well. So in some capacities, that might be a little easier to read. And some, we've got all of that. Any other questions on the roadmap and timelines? Anything that was not brought up from either kind of a broader vertical that we didn't bring up that should be discussed?
I see Commissioner Revelle has his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for the director, which is with regards to the pace and timing. While I scroll back to a year ago, I was concerned that the anticipated timeline was too rapid. It now kind of strikes me as this is taking longer than I maybe would have expected to reach some of these milestones. And I would just be curious from the director's perspective if there are roadblocks to making progress on some of these milestones, and if there is something that we as a commission can be doing differently to assist the director and the incoming staff to perhaps be making more progress between meetings to accomplish some of these goals.
So through the chair, in response, and Commissioner Revelle, thank you for the question. You know, I think it comes down to just the frequency of, well, it comes down to a couple of things, right? Obviously, there's been a lot of time focused on getting the agency in order, getting budget, getting personnel, all along the way. So those have taken some time, but I think the more frequently we're able to communicate, the faster this is going to go. So subcommittees are going to be a factor in that. Having just a general, perhaps not the best term to use, but kind of a tone shift to where instead of having meetings every month and, you know, just dropping a bunch of context on you, having perhaps an expectation that every other week there may be a 30-minute discussion to approve something that's burning iron in the fire. If that's the will of the commission, then I'm more than amenable to facilitate whatever needs to get done in that capacity. I think at this point we're past a lot of the administrative and operational tasks. From the perspective of this legislative session coming up, I don't foresee us having any amendments that are going to impact us. And we're not really on the radar for that. We're not at this time asking for any more supplemental budget. We're going to see what we can get with what we have. So all that to say is I think we're going to have a better opportunity to be heads down, period. We also have, you know, a team coming online, and we also have the wisdom of the crowd with us now too. So I would expect things to start moving much more rapidly going forward.
Very good. Thanks. And as I say, I think, you know, if there are, to Commissioner Revelle's point, if there are things that we can move in between meetings, I think we can facilitate that if necessary. So.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay, then. So moving on to the next topic. And I have an admission here. This is a little bit of a dog ate my homework kind of situation. I had a business plan scoping document that was consumed by, apparently, you have Google Docs open and you have two of the same file open in two different tabs, and one is being saved in a cloud and one is offline, they will kind of consume each other. So what I've looked to do is put together a very quick, and I will say tool assisted version of this document. Really what I want to do is, ahead of getting back into subcommittees and going back through the business plan, I wanted to kind of strategize about what's not there that should be included in it. And just generally talk with the commission about it. So I will admit this is not necessarily my words or tone, but generally what I wanted to get across was some of these things that are that we should think about putting into the business plan. So from a perspective of market analysis, I can go stop sharing the screen real quick. So I hope the camera's back. From the perspective of market analysis, perhaps a more direct comparison to some of the other incumbents that are out there, and really focusing on the way that we're positioning ourselves and against those that are already out there with significant market cap. I think this goes back to Commissioner Rebel's comment from some months ago about building the better mousetrap. And I think we should really start thinking about when we kind of get back into the business plan, really use that as our lens to bring about kind of some of the forward thinking about how we use the Wyoming stable token. That may also have implications for where we are geographically in terms of where we can make the most impact. And again, this will be, a Wyoming product. It will be perhaps available globally on whatever timeline as that manifests. But we could certainly put some thought into how we roll this out across geos. And I just want to pause for 1 second and make sure, do our commissioners online have this? Do we have to email this to them? Pardon those who are online, you are getting a copy of this momentarily. So that was some of the market analysis piece. In terms of legal and regulatory compliance, I think we are doing that. I think the question becomes whether some of the specificity about our legal stance on where the stable token stands vis-a-vis being, not being a security, things like that, how explicit we want to be about that. And perhaps whether or not those should be part of a business plan, or perhaps there's a more legally focused white paper. We dig in the details of that in case law, and would be a separate deliverable. I think a more robust one, but that's another kind of potentiality there. The token development operations very much the same, my perspective, as the legal situation. The business plan is a place we can dive into some of the details, or we can keep a business plan at a high level and focus on, if we have a focus on really the technical nitty gritty, that would be a different white paper. I now noticed that Commissioner Navas and Commissioner Bill both had their hands up, so I'm going to pause there.
Okay, I'll recognize Navas first and then Commissioner Ravel.
Thank you, Governor. Anthony and Devin, I know that our contract with outside counsel has expired recently. Can you let the commission know what other steps we need to be taken to renew that contract, please?
Director.
So through the chair, Commissioner Navas. So there are a couple ways we explore this. One is going through the full procurement process again. Well, let me rephrase that. Going through the full procurement process as outlined by our own procurement rule set, or through ANI and their set. I will remind the commission that when we did engage that party, it was done through what's called a BEA request. I believe it's a bid exemption authorization, which means if there is a smaller amount of teams that are involved, we can kind of move more expeditiously through that. Because we know that there's only a small number of qualified parties who could provide those specific services. And perhaps, and being that we are a very unique project, perhaps there is a sole sourcing component here too. But suffice it to say, I think we're thinking through some ways to get back into that groove sooner rather than later, as opposed to putting that into, making that RFP number 6 of 5 that already need to be drafted.
Yes, and Director and Commissioner, I would say from my perspective, they have familiarity with our token. I think there are ways to justify sole sourcing this out of necessity, and we'll work with the AG and I to make sure that happens.
Yeah, Governor, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, this is council that has been with us for over a year and understands our project really well. If we were to start this process again, we will have to onboard and spend countless hours. You know, if there is an opportunity to continue working with them in a way that meets statutory requirements, I will, you know, I will recommend that the commission explore that with the AG's office. Thank you.
And Commissioner Lavelle.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just a comment for the director and for the commission. I don't see the sort of strategic plan or market analysis update, but I did just want to put onto the table here as we go forward. I think an evolution we're seeing in the market, and in the spirit of skating to where the puck is going, for stable tokens, there is increasingly an opportunity for token holders to earn some sort of yield. And I'm going to use that term loosely so that we're not crossing any lines in terms of definitions of security. But I do think that from a competitive market position, it's something that we need to be aware of and make sure that we're contemplating as we discuss the design of this. It also has implications for the ultimate profits back to the state of Wyoming. So it's not an insignificant feature to be contemplating.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Director.
Through the chair and to Commissioner Revelle, I would like to just quickly second that perspective. When I have my newsroom segments, we talk about all this innovation going offshore. That's predominantly what it is. It's these yield-bearing stable tokens that are growing quite rapidly, and we don't have any of that onshore. And if we had an opportunity to do that, that would be, I think, a fairly massive differentiation. So I would just firmly bolster Commissioner Revelle's point.
Director and members of the commission, you know, as I look at this business plan scoping document and I see each of the topics: market analysis, legal, regulatory compliance, token development, and operations. I also have sitting next to it the list of subcommittees, and it seems to me that in the sense of sort of being able to move expeditiously, I'm wondering, Director, if it doesn't make sense to assign market analysis more completely to the market group, legal and regulatory compliance, to just sort of build out that plan and be able to bring that to whatever next meeting we have. Does that make sense to you?
Mr. Chairman, it does. I think what you're proposing is kind of a horizontal across the verticals, for
Right.
lack of a better term. Just making sure that the business plan works as the Schelling point for everyone to kind of dump their progress into. And yes, there will be different deliverables for each of the working groups. So procurement's going to have RFPs and pre-quals, but when we start generating all this great wisdom of the crowd, we want to make sure we're capturing it somewhere, and the business plan should be the place for that. That's what I'm hearing.
So I'm thinking, because it does appeal to me like this is building out and developing over time. I'm trying to figure out how to make that process grow a little bit quicker. I also know that you're the nexus, or Steph will be the nexus of that. Perhaps there's a way we can work together to sort of figure out ways that we can get that implemented to be able to, as Commissioner Revelle mentioned, add to the market analysis in an appropriate way in that effort. Or am I missing the intent of this?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think you are. I think we're on the same page here. Maybe use
Okay.
the wrong vernacular, but I'll note on the subcommittee page that Steph and myself are pretty much involved in all of these, and that might change based on just availabilities, and we need to be two places at once we can. But whether it's us creating some kind of, where we're kind of the ones who kind of bring it all together and put into the marketing plan, or we just kind of assign people based on the perceived responsibilities of others in the working groups. We want to make sure we don't over-index anybody. We want to, we're getting some very bright people involved, just because of how interesting this project is and where they think it's going to go. So we want to make sure we respect their time. And we could kind of make sure we're getting the right folks working on the right things. If we need to start assigning people, we could certainly do that. Fine. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to jump through a couple more of these, financial models and timelines, I think we've already kind of covered off on. The succession plan, we'll be careful about that one. Really what this comes down to is like a multi-signature wallet solution. You need to do some good thinking around that, and that might be something that happens in an executive session, because we start to think about, again, physical security, OPSEC, and how we're going to make sure that we keep everything that's part of even though this is a digital asset we're talking about, there are still physical implementations that we need to be cognizant of and protective of, and that's how some of that should manifest. We'll certainly need a risk mitigation and crisis plan, just in case, right? And then one of the other things in here, innovation and future outlook. I'll suffice that to say that, in the statute, when we have our waterfall of funds, there is the ability to, after we come down from the payment, the 102% buffer, pay for the operational expenses of the agency, there is kind of a bucket in there for R&D. And I think that should be something the commission talks about as we revisit again the cadence of that waterfall. We should talk R&D and how much we're comfortable squaring away in the commission for future use cases we want to explore. Or maybe that's the money we need to test a new blockchain or maybe a new product. So I think that'd be part of it. But generally speaking, I think we can start using the plan as a way to, it's already in there to a certain extent, but a way to kind of bring other use cases forward, novel ones that perhaps people haven't thought about being used for the implementation of stable tokens. And again, I apologize, this was not necessarily the document I wanted to put forth, but generally speaking, I just want to capture a couple of different thoughts I had ahead of going back into the business plan and just bulking it up a bit and bring it in line with where we are now and bringing it as a living document to the initial launch of the token. So if anyone has any other thoughts, I'm happy to kind of jot them down and make sure we fit those in as well. So we kind of do this process of getting back into it.
Very good. Okay.
No questions. Actually, no hands. So the last kind of item on my list is the frequently asked questions. Again, we don't need to go through this in any great level of detail, but to recap what I said earlier in the conversation, we know this project is kind of getting out into the wild. It's getting more publicity, which means we're getting more questions about what it is we're doing. And I will admit that I'm firmly in the bubble at this point. When I first got into the blockchain space back in 2015, I extracted myself, but now it's taking a hold of me. So what we want to do is make sure we have a FAQ on the website where people who are less familiar with this technology can come in and still get an understanding and a bearing of what is a blockchain, what is a stable token, how is it different than a cryptocurrency, why would I use it, and what is Wyoming doing in this respect. So I'm just going to quickly walk through this because, again, I think most of you are familiar with the context here, but we started a high level about what is a digital asset, what's cryptocurrency, what's blockchain, how does blockchain work, and what's the point. We talk a little bit about the use cases for blockchain outside of just cryptocurrencies and speculative assets. We talk about the different types of blockchains, which is always important. Smart contracts and miners. We talk about digital wallets and some questions there. And then we get into more specificity about the stable token itself. So what is a stable token? How do they compare to other cryptos, whether or not volatile, of course? Why would you use a stable token, $1? Why wouldn't I just put my money in the bank? So why would I buy stable token instead? We've got some context there. I then added a little bit of a couple of clips from the statute of how Wyoming defines these things specifically, because we do have very nuanced definitions around digital assets, digital consumer assets, digital securities, virtual currency. That all impacts what it is we're doing with the stable token as well. Some history on the stable token commission, some context about the Wyoming stable token and what we're doing to mitigate against the risk of depegging. So we've got our short duration treasuries and repos. We've got our 102% reserve. We specify that we have not launched on any blockchain yet. We have not minted any tokens yet. Talked about conserves on the commission and where they could find more info and join the next hearing. So again, we've already got 30 questions here. I was already thinking of some on the way over here this morning. So we have, why would I use a Wyoming stable token instead of a dollar, or keep it in tokens instead of a bank? We could have the same question about, other stable tokens. Why use a Wyoming stable token instead of what's already out there? So certainly more to come on this. Probably won't be sharing this again as a document in the future. I'll just acknowledge that it's updated on the website. And to the extent that you are getting questions from any of your constituents about the work we're doing, perhaps people think things are going one way, but really it's another, feel free to send those my way, and I can include them in the FAQs that are now live on the website as well.
And Director, one thing that is, I think of concern to folks in Wyoming, which isn't on this, is how would WIST interact with banks? A little bit unclear at this point, but I think it's important that we indicate we're not trying to compete. We're not trying to take business. And in fact, it's part of just building the overall economy of Wyoming.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm gonna, is that Commissioner
Yeah, this is
Meyer?
Kurt.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
I'll have Commissioner Wallace afterwards.
Okay, one of the things that I think should be right up there is why the stable token is not cryptocurrency. Because people, one of the first things a lot of these new legislators will speaks to me is, so we don't want to get we're into Bitcoin. We don't want to do these things. So there's a I think a misunderstanding that what a stable token is, and and I think and what it isn't. So maybe the first 5 things up there is what it isn't and what it is, so people understand that that we're not trying to do a Bitcoin. That it's and you're getting into the 100% backed by U.S. Treasuries, and people don't like the U.S. dollar anyway because they think that it's a big problem, and it is with the inflation and everything else. But that aside, that's another topic. But I think we need to be really straight. The first frequently asked question should be is like, why is this not Bitcoin? Just you have to get rid of the fear that people have, thinking that we're gonna launch a product that isn't secure, and it isn't, we're not getting into Bitcoin trading or anything like that, because there's that understanding and a genuine fear that we're crossing a line where all this is a payment, basically rail, and that's pretty much it. But we get paid for essentially putting this together. So those are, I think, try to keep it really simple in the first 5 questions. And you want to get into the detail in the next 25, that's fine, but you got to keep it simple coming out of the box. That's my recommendation.
Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my first thought here is the state of Wyoming. Should we be encouraging people not to use banks? And that's if you're reading the FAQ. I think there's going to be quite a few people in the state of Wyoming, particularly bankers, that are not going to be appreciative of seeing a thing on the state website of why they shouldn't put money in a bank. I think you're missing some important things there as far as FDIC insurance and that sort of thing. So think you're kind of hoping, a little bit of a can of worms with that. And kind of in relation to that, question is, where's the money going to come from to fund small business lending if we take all of our money out of banks? So again, I think we're kind of opening a can of worms with talking about not using banks, and I appreciate the governor saying we have to figure out how this is going to work in conjunction with the banks. So I think we need to rethink about that number 16 and putting that on a state website.
Understood. Thank you.
Further comments? Right. Thanks, Director. Do you want us to send, will this be a Google document or a shared document that we can?
Mr. Chairman, it is a Google Doc that I'm happy to share.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can make suggestions.
Any other questions from the commissioners?
Any other questions? I don't see any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In that case, I think we can start winding down from my side a bit here.
Okay.
That potential public comment. In terms of next steps, I think we've kind of belabored that point between vendor pre-qualification at the next meeting and then the request for proposal in November. Perhaps those are now going to be sooner if we're going to be adjusting the meeting cadence. So we'll hang tight on those. Perhaps that'll be sooner rather than later. And then in terms of upcoming events, the next meeting of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission will be on October 24th from 9 to 12 Mountain Time, back in the, not there, but it is back in the Wyoming Capitol Auditorium. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm done.
All right, are there further questions, comments? Members of the commission? If there are none, I think, Director, we're at a point of public comment.
Yes, sir. Sure.
So if there are members of the public that would like to comment, now is an appropriate time. Please, if you could just come up. I think there's hopefully one of these microphones will work. Begin by identifying yourselves.
My name is Bruce Martin. I'm the CPO of Rock County Financial. I realize that the time is of the essence of this project. Given the aggressive timeline, vendor qualification application, I expect some of the smaller companies like ours, genuine interest and expertise in the project, will be unable to pre-qualify in time. For example, we may need to renegotiate insurance policies that require stock audits, audited financial statements, etc. My question is, once the pre-qualified vendors are chosen, will the commission be open for other vendors not selected in the initial round, be evaluated and qualified in the future, perhaps at each monthly commission meeting when they have all the meetings?
Director, I don't know if you've thought about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lou, for your time and showing up. So one of the interesting notes, and Devin will correct me if I misrepresent any of this, but when we created our procurement rule set, it was rolled forward from the state construction department. The way the state construction department works is they kind of have a rolling list of qualified vendors. I believe it's every 2 years, people need to re-up their qualifications. We took that out because we did not intend to have that from the get-go, but we could in the future put a similar structure back in, especially when you start thinking about going across multiple blockchains, wallets, and just leveraging different infrastructure. We can't have that type of system. I think it'd be a bit cumbersome for us to have for V1, but I think in the future we could put that back in.
Okay. Further comments? That answer your question? Thank you. Thank you. Brian, I see there's an attendee that has a hand up. You're identified on the screen as MCW, and we'll recognize you.
Yes, commissioners, thank you. My question to
And
the
could
group.
you identify yourself?
Oh,
Beyond
I'm
him?
sorry. Yes, Margaret Wisniewski. I'm a citizen up here in Sheridan, Wyoming.
Okay.
I was listening to one of your committee meetings last year, and one of the vendors that was speaking said it would take a high degree of energy to issue a Wyoming stable token. And I have not heard anyone discuss the issue of energy behind this. Where are you folks, where do you stand on that today?
Thank you. Director?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. So the energy consumption from blockchain networks is dependent on which kind of consensus mechanism the network uses. And that's already got some jargon in it. So essentially, how the computers on a given blockchain network agree to the transactions. So on networks that use something called proof of work consensus, the way that these computers show that they've done the work is they have to solve a very, very computationally difficult math question. And they do that by running a very large number of hashes over the course of 10 minutes until one of the Bitcoin miners kind of solves this artificially difficult math problem. So that's the process by which Bitcoin blocks are created. That's proof of work that can be very energy intensive. On the other hand, there's a lot of other blockchains that use something called proof of stake, which is not energy intensive whatsoever. You probably burn more energy watching a YouTube video on your phone than doing a transaction of proof of stake network, because that essentially just uses people who have used that platform's native cryptocurrency, staking it somewhere to validate the network instead of the computational intensity of something like Bitcoin and proof of work. So that is actually one of the questions we have in the FAQs, because we did want to address that one proactively. And I'll pause there because I threw a lot of vernacular at you. So
That's very true. You want to put that in layman's terms?
Through the chair, there are blockchain networks that can use a lot of energy to validate transactions. There are many networks that do not use a lot of energy to validate transactions. And the Stable Token Commission has not made a determination on which blockchain network it would use. So we don't necessarily have a perspective on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further, I do see a notice in the chat. I'm sorry, Brian. There's no further questions. All right. If there are no further questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by the auditor, Commissioner Racinas. Is there support for Commissioner Racinas's motion?
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for being here.